In today's lesson, we're going to look at 5 different approaches we can use for soloing over a 2-5-1. Now, a 2-5-1 is a super common chord sequence that's found a lot in jazz, but it's equally useful in the blues, gospel, and R&B styles as well. Now, today we're going to be looking at a major 2-5-1, and a major 2-5-1 is derived from a major key. And for all the examples today, we're going to be in the key of C major. Now, our 2 chord in C major is a D minor 7, our 5 chord is G dominant 7, and our 1 chord is C major 7. So that's our 2-5-1. But oftentimes you'll see 2-5-1s used as a way to transition from one chord to the next. For instance, if we're playing a blues in the key of G, like around a G7 chord, we might use a 2-5-1 to get to the 4 chord of the blues, in which case we would do D minor 7, G7, then to like a C7 chord as the 4 chord in a blues. So there's a ton of ways to apply these 2-5-1s, and once you start getting into particularly playing jazz standards, but also a lot of R&B and gospel tunes use this kind of stuff a lot. A lot of Ray Charles tunes use these kind of chord sequences to transition between chords. So all of these chords live within the key of C major. So you might be thinking, well, I can just play over these chords using the C major scale. And that's certainly true. All these chords are diatonic to C major. All of the chord tones in each one of these chords lives within that C major scale. But if you want to get a little bit deeper inside the chords and really play solos that sound like they're outlining the changes, the best approach for starting that is to really learn the chord tones to each chord and to learn your arpeggio shapes. For instance, learning my D minor 7 shape in that position, and then my G dominant 7 shape, and then my C major 7 shape. Right, if I can see those arpeggio shapes and that cluster of chord tones in each position moving up the neck, then it's going to allow me to play lines that really live more inside of the chords. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to just play to a little chord pad of 2-5-1 in the key of C major. The chords are going to go D minor 7, G7, C major 7. And the first time around, I'm just going to kind of play out of the C major scale without really targeting any chord tones over any chord in particular. Just kind of playing through the scale in a very basic way. And you can kind of hear how that works, but it has a very particular sound to it. And then the second time around, I'm going to play using these arpeggio shapes. And everything's just going to stay in this one position for right now. But you'll hear how as soon as I start targeting chord tones like the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th over these chords, it immediately starts to sound more inside the chord progression, like the actual notes I'm playing in my solos actually sound like the chords. And that's kind of what we're going for in this first approach. All right, so now that we've got these basic chord tones under our fingers, the next step we're going to take is to superimpose some other arpeggios over these chords. And for this, we're going to use upper structure 7th chords. So the easiest way to see this on the neck is to look at these basic chord voicings. If we look at a D minor 7 voicing right here, to find an upper structure 7th chord, what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of playing the root, 3rd, 5th, and flat 7th, we're going to instead take the root away, and now we're going to play the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th. So if we take this D minor 7 chord right here and we take away the root, we see that we're left with an F major triad. Now if we add the 9th on top, this note E, then we get basically an F major 7th chord, and that's sort of our upper structure 7th chord on top of a D minor 7. So in the place of D minor 7, we can play this F major 7 arpeggio and get that kind of D minor 9 sound, which is a really pretty sound. Now if we move on to our G7, we can see right here, if we take the root away and we just play the top part of this chord, we get like a B diminished chord. And if we add the 9th on top, we end up with a B minor 7 flat 5 chord. And finally, for the C major 7, if we take away this C note and we just play the top part of the chord, we get an E minor triad. And if we add the 9th on top, then we get an E minor 7th, right? So again, just like we did before, knowing these arpeggio shapes in different positions around the neck is going to be really helpful. So for instance, we can take like an F major 7, a B minor 7 flat 5, and an E minor 7, and play those in one position on the neck and use that as material to come up with lines to sort of navigate over these chords and play interesting musical stuff over these chord changes. So now I'm going to play again through the progression, and the first time around I'll play our original chord tones, just D minor 7, G7, C major 7. And then the second time around I'll introduce these upper structure chords and play F major 7 to B minor 7 flat 5 to E minor 7. Alright, so now that we've got a basic understanding of how to play chord tones and kind of play things that are inside these chords, we can start to introduce some altered notes. And one of the things that I love to do over the 5 chord, over this G7 chord, is to actually play a full diminished 7th arpeggio. So instead of a B minor 7 flat 5 chord or a B half diminished chord, we're going to play a fully diminished B chord. And so this A note is going to drop down to an A flat. And then we get, this flat 9 essentially is what it is. When that A drops down to A flat over the G7 chord, it gives us this really beautiful dissonant tension that resolves really nicely when we go back to our 1 chord. And so now this is just another arpeggio we can introduce into the mix. So we can play things like D minor 7 over the 2 chord, then to our B diminished, then resolve to C. Right, so really nice, beautiful lines. Right, so I'm going to play over the progression now, and again, I'll kind of reiterate what we did in the previous approach, and I'll play our upper structure arpeggios, right? So F major 7 to B minor 7 flat 5 to E minor 7. And then the second time around, I'll change that B minor 7 flat 5 to a fully diminished B diminished 7th chord, and you can hear how that flat 9 builds tension and then releases when we resolve to the 1 chord. Okay, so in that last approach, we sort of dipped our toe into the altered sound, the sort of world of altered chord tones we can put over a dominant 5 chord. Now let's continue on that path by introducing the full altered scale, right? This is the 7th mode of the melodic minor scale, and we're going to use it over the G7 chord. So if you're thinking melodic minor, you would be playing A flat melodic minor. But I tend to think of this as a G dominant 7 scale. I think of it as a scale with the root, the 3rd, and the flat 7th, and then everything else is sort of an altered upper extension. You have the flat 9, you have the sharp 9, you have the sharp 11, and you have the flat 13 that are all these altered upper extensions you can put on top of a dominant chord. So this scale, if we play through it, just in that one octave, sounds like that. So root, flat 9, sharp 9, 3rd, flat 5th or sharp 11, sharp 5 or flat 13, depending on how you want to look at it, flat 7th, and then back to your root. Now we can plug this scale in the same spot, the same way we did our diminished 7th arpeggio, our B diminished 7th arpeggio. And it's just going to give us a fully altered sound, right? With more options for tension and release and different colors, sort of different dissonant colors we can add over that G7 chord. So right, different things we can play. So again, I will play over the track. First time around, I'll play that B diminished 7th arpeggio. And then the second time around, I'll play something using the altered scale. Right, and resolve to a chord tone when we hit that C major 7 chord. All right, for this last approach, I want to introduce the concept of a tritone substitution. Now, tritone substitutions are used a lot over dominant chords. Because of the nature of a dominant chord, it has this tritone interval within it, right, between the flat 7th and the 3rd. So one of the little tricks you can do is, instead of playing G in the bass, you can play D flat in the bass, and you still have this tritone interval between the 3rd and flat 7th. It's just reversed as you change the root note. So for G, you would have the flat 7th and the 3rd on top. When you go to D flat, you have the 3rd on the bottom and the flat 7th on top. But these two chords are sort of interchangeable in this context. So for this approach, instead of playing D minor 7, G7 to C major 7, we're going to play D minor 7, D flat dominant 7 to C major 7. And the chords underneath are going to stay the same. I'm still going to play the basic 2-5-1, right? D to G to C. But in my solo, I'm going to use that D flat 7th arpeggio, right, to outline the sounds of that chord. And it's going to build a little different tension and rub a little bit, but then I can resolve it really nicely to C major 7. All right, so hopefully this lesson was helpful for you. All the tabs for all these examples are going to be available over on my Patreon page, so be sure to go check that out. Also, check the links down in the description for all my courses. I just put out a new blues rhythm guitar course over on TrueFire, so be sure to check that out. As always, I want to thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Take care, happy practicing, and I'll catch you next time.